The Ardent had no business being in this part of space. That was the first thing Admiral Vexcaroth said when his sensor officer put the human vessel on the main display. He said it the way a person says something that is funny and obvious and not worth much thought. He said it, and then he moved on to other things because the Ardent was not worth much thought. It was a human ship. Old. Slow. The kind of vessel that other species retired 20 years ago and sold for scrap. The humans had patched it and run it and somehow kept it moving, which was impressive in the small way that a stray dog surviving a hard winter is impressive. You notice it. You do not fear it. Vexcaroth was Vexali. 7 feet of gray-plated shell, 4 upper limbs, 2 lower, and a mind that had won battles across 11 star systems. He had destroyed fleets. He had broken species. He had watched civilizations fold inward like burned paper. The Vexali did not lose. This was not arrogance. It was record. He looked at the Ardent on his screen and felt nothing. His comms officer, a young Vexali named Esreth, was already pulling the ship's registry. Human designation UHS Ardent, Esreth read. Commissioned 43 years ago. Engine class Meridian 7. Maximum sustainable speed 0.4 light. Current speed, he paused, made a small sound that in Vexali translated roughly as you cannot be serious. 0.16 light, Admiral. 0.16. The Conclave fleet was running at 0.9. Vexcaroth let the number sit in the air of the bridge. Around him, his officers absorbed it. Then one of them, a senior tactician named Goreth, made a sound that was the Vexali equivalent of a laugh, low and grinding like stones settling. And that was all it took. The bridge opened up, all 12 officers laughing. The sound filled the room, heavy and pleased. Vexcaroth did not laugh, not because he didn't find it funny, because he was the Admiral. Laughing was for people with less to do. He opened the ship-to-ship channel, all frequencies. Let everyone in this region of space hear him. Human vessel Ardent, he said. You are traveling at 0.16 light in contested space. Our slowest support freighter does not travel at 0.16 light. Please confirm your engine status, as we are curious whether you are damaged or simply built this way. He closed the channel. Goreth laughed harder. On the bridge of the Ardent, Commander Yale Dross heard every word. He was sitting in his command chair with a mug of coffee that had gone cold 40 minutes ago. He had not noticed. He was not the kind of man who noticed things like cold coffee. He noticed other things, angles, distances, the way a situation breathed when you stopped poking it. He was 46 years old and looked 60. 3 wars had done that. 3 wars and the particular kind of tiredness that lives in a person who has seen too many smart plans fail and watched the dumb ones succeed for all the wrong reasons. He had brown skin pulled tight over a sharp face, gray in his short hair, and eyes that sat very still in his head even when everything around him was moving. He listened to Vexcaroth's transmission. He drank his cold coffee. "Should I respond, Commander?" said Ensign Priya Shen from the weapons station. "No," said Dross. Priya Shen was 24 and had been on the Ardent for 11 months. Before that, she'd been through 2 years of weapons training at the Luna Academy, where she had finished top of her class and expected to be placed on a fast ship doing important things. Instead, she'd been posted to the Ardent, which was old and slow and smelled like recycled air and old metal, and something faintly chemical that nobody had ever successfully identified. She had spent the first 3 months of her posting trying to figure out why she'd been assigned here. She had spent the next 8 months trying to stop thinking about it. She had a habit of talking when she was nervous. She was nervous most of the time. "They're broadcasting on open comms," she said. "Everyone in the sector can hear that." "Yes," said Dross. "Doesn't that bother you?" "No." Priya looked at the back of his head. He was watching the main display. The Conclave fleet was on it, a cluster of contacts arranged in tight formation, gleaming and fast and enormous. The Ardent sensor overlay marked each vessel with a classification tag. Dreadnought, battle carrier, destroyer, 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 support frigate, another dreadnought. 22 ships, all of them faster than the Ardent. All of them better armed. All of them crewed by species that had been flying between stars while humanity was still arguing about how to get off its own planet. "Sir," said Thon from the navigation station. Thon was Grevian, gray-skinned, tall, with a face that seemed to have been designed with too much forehead and not enough jaw. He'd been on the Ardent since before Priya. He rarely spoke. When he did, it was short and aimed. "The Conclave fleet is adjusting heading," Thon said. "They are no longer paralleling us. They are moving away, toward the Cashin corridor." Dross nodded once. "Should I log that as a threat withdrawal?" Priya asked. "Log it as movement," said Dross. "Don't call it anything else." Priya logged it as movement. She watched the Conclave contacts drift across the display, pulling away from the Ardent the way a river pulls away from a rock. Not because the rock is dangerous, but because the rock is simply not interesting enough to flow around slowly. The river had somewhere to be. They were leaving. Of course they were leaving. The Ardent was a rock. The ship was old, and the old parts showed. The corridor between the bridge and crew quarters had a lighting panel that flickered on a 12-second cycle. Someone had marked the flickering panel with a small piece of tape and written, "Still broken day 89" on it in black ink. The tape had yellowed. The panel still flickered. Whoever had written the note had either given up or rotated off the ship or both. The mess hall had 3 tables and served food that was nutritionally adequate and gastronomically punishing. The coffee was the worst thing about it. Somehow the ship's synthesizer produced coffee that was both weak and bitter at the same time, which was an achievement of sorts. The crew drank it anyway. Dross drank it constantly. The crew numbered 41. Most of them were human. 37 humans and 4 aliens, Thon and 3 others who had, for their own reasons, ended up on a human ship far from their home systems. Nobody talked much about why the aliens were here. The aliens didn't offer. The humans didn't push. It was a ship arrangement, not a friendship. Priya was eating in the mess hall when she heard the second transmission. It was coming through the general comms. The Ardent picked up all broadband signals in range, and Vexcaroth was broadcasting on broadband again. This time he wasn't talking to the Ardent. He was talking to someone else, but the content was about them. The human vessel remains in Sector 7, drifting at its usual pace. It presents no tactical consideration. We have allocated 0 defensive resources to it. If it continues its current heading, it will reach the edge of the contested zone in approximately 4 months, at which point it will become someone else's nothing. Laughter in the background of the transmission, many voices. Priya set down her fork. Across the table, a human engineer named Ortega kept eating. "You get used to it," he said without looking up. "Does it stop being true?" Priya said. Ortega looked up then. He was older than her, early 30s, with calloused hands and a permanent crease between his eyes from squinting at engine readouts. He'd been on the Ardent for 3 years. He thought about her question like it deserved real consideration. "No," he said, "it doesn't stop being true. We are slow, they are fast, that's just the numbers." "Then how do you get used to it?" He picked up his fork again. "You remember that the commander knows something you don't." "What does he know?" Ortega shrugged. "Don't know, that's the point." Dross was in his quarters when Thon came to find him. His quarters were small and almost entirely empty of personal items. A bed, a desk, a single photograph taped to the wall above the desk, a coastline, dark water, a gray sky, no people. Nobody had ever asked him where it was. He wouldn't have answered anyway. Thon stood in the doorway. He had to duck slightly because he was taller than the door was designed for. He'd been doing that for 3 years and had never complained. "The Conclave fleet has reached the Cashin corridor," Thon said. "I know. They are setting up for a 3-point approach to the Hellion colonies." "I know." Thon was quiet for a moment. "The colonies have a combined defensive strength of 14 ships, old ones, slower than us even." "I know." "Commander," Thon's voice was not emotional. It was something more difficult than emotion. It was plain. Are we going to help them? Dross looked at the photograph. Dark water, gray sky. We're going to do exactly what we've been doing, he said. Drifting. Moving, Dross said, slowly in the right direction. Thon looked at him for a long time with his too-much-forehead face and his careful alien eyes. Then he ducked back through the doorway and left. Dross sat down at his desk. He pulled up a display, not the tactical overview, not the conclave fleet positions, but a simple map. The kind that just showed space. Black and honest. He looked at the space between where the Ardent currently was and where it had been 14 months ago, when it left Earth under orders that most of his crew didn't fully know about, carrying cargo that was listed in the manifest under 3 layers of maintenance codes that almost no one had reason to check. He traced the line with his finger. 14 months of travel at 0.16 light. 14 months of slow. The conclave called it weakness. He called it timing. On the open band frequency that covered the sector, the traffic was thick with conclave communications, fleet movements, supply updates, strategic briefings delivered with the confidence of people who have already written their victory report and just need the battle to cooperate. The Ardent floated through all of it like a piece of debris nobody had gotten around to logging. That evening, ship time, which was the only time that mattered in deep space, Priya sat at her weapons station after her shift had technically ended, because she had nothing better to do and because the weapons manifest was bothering her. She had checked the weapons manifest before. When she first came aboard, standard orientation, the Ardent was armed modestly, point defense cannons, old generation, 2 forward rail guns that needed 15 minutes to recharge between shots, a missile battery rated for short-range engagement. Nothing special, nothing that made it anything other than what it appeared to be. But tonight she was looking at the cargo manifest, not weapons, cargo. And there was something in there that sat wrong. A maintenance code, long number, filed 14 months ago, right before the ship left Earth. The code corresponded to a routine parts shipment, replacement components for the engine cooling system. But when she cross-referenced the weight of that shipment with the listed parts, the numbers didn't match. Not by a small margin. The weight listed was 14 times heavier than a cooling parts shipment of that size should be. 14 times. She sat with that. She thought about asking Dross. She thought about what Ortega had said. You remember that the commander knows something you don't. She closed the manifest. She opened it again. She looked at the weight discrepancy for another 20 minutes. Then she closed it and went to bed and lay on her back and stared at the ceiling of her bunk in the dark, listening to the low hum of engines running at 0.16 light. Slow. The ship was always slow. She thought about why a ship would travel this slowly for this long in this direction, if it was just planning to observe and drift and do nothing. She didn't come up with an answer. But the question stayed with her, stuck to the inside of her skull like a burr. 3 days after the Conclave's open-com mockery, Vexcaroth sent another broadband message. Not to the Ardent. He had already forgotten the Ardent. This was a message to the Hellion colonies, the 3 human worlds that his fleet was now positioned to strike. Your defensive capacity has been assessed, he said. It is insufficient. We suggest evacuation of non-essential personnel before our arrival. This is not a negotiation. This is a calendar notification. The Conclave bridge laughed again. Vexcaroth closed the channel. In the mess hall of the Ardent, Ortega stopped eating. Priya set down her coffee. 2 other crew members looked at each other and didn't say anything. The ship hummed, slow and steady, moving through space at a speed that insulted the word speed. Nobody cried. Nobody yelled. They were a military crew, and military crews train the feelings down to a small, dense thing you carry in your chest and try not to let rattle around too much. But Priya pressed her hands flat on the table. And across the ship in his quarters, Dross looked at his photograph of dark water and a gray sky, and he waited, and the Ardent moved, and the stars outside the windows did not change very much because at this speed they almost never did. The conclave did not look back. They never looked back at slow things. That was their habit. That was the thing. The conclave fleet moved like it had always moved, with the ease of something that had never needed to be careful. Vexcaroth ran tight formations. That was his preference and his reputation. He kept his 22 ships within 300 kilometers of each other, a dense cluster that could redirect fire in any direction within seconds. It was the formation that had crushed the Telhari at the Battle of Crossing Point. It was the formation that had broken the Grevian Eastern Fleet at Von Station. It was a beautiful formation. The way industrial machinery is beautiful, not pretty, but perfect for its purpose. His fleet entered the Cashin corridor and moved toward the Hellion colonies at Point 9 light. Behind them, far behind them, the Ardent continued at Point 16. Esreth, the comms officer, checked the Ardent's position twice in the first day out of habit and then stopped checking because there was nothing to check. The human ship was doing what it had been doing for however long it had been in Sector 7. Drifting. Slow. Irrelevant. He filed it as non-contact in the log and moved on. The Hellion colonies had 3 names: Hellion Prime, Hellion Station, and the settlement everyone just called the Rock because it was built into the surface of an asteroid, and nobody had given it a better name when they built it. And by the time anyone thought to give it a proper name, it had been the Rock for 20 years, and that was that. Hellion Prime had the largest population, about 400,000 people. Miners, farmers, engineers, families who had come out here 3 generations ago when Earth was encouraging settlement, and the frontier felt like opportunity rather than exposure. The planet was not beautiful. It had gray-brown soil and thin air that needed supplements to breathe comfortably and a sun that was slightly too far away to feel warm. But the people who lived there had built it into something real. Schools. Clinics, a small university. Streets that were not glamorous but were maintained. The people on Hellion Prime had 14 warships to protect them. Not 14 conclave dreadnoughts. 14 ships of the same general vintage as the Ardent, old, slow, earnest, running on maintenance budgets that the colonial government argued about every year. Their commander was a woman named Captain Eli Marsh, who had gray hair cut short, and who had been making the same request for reinforcement to Earth Command for 4 years, and receiving the same polite acknowledgement in return. When Vexcaroth's fleet came out of the corridor, Captain Marsh looked at the sensor display and was quiet for a very long time. Then she gave her orders. All ships to defensive positions. Pull tight around Hellion Prime. We protect the population. And the station, her first officer asked, and the Rock. Marsh looked at the display. 22 conclave ships against 14 colonial defenders. She did the arithmetic fast because the arithmetic was not complicated. We protect the population, she said again, and her voice was flat and clear and left no room. Earth Command received Captain Marsh's distress signal and responded within 6 hours, which was fast by the standards of interstellar communication, and still meant nothing in practical terms because the nearest reinforcement fleet was 11 days away at best speed. 11 days. Marsh did not respond to that transmission. She had nothing useful to say to it. Earth Command then did what governments do when they cannot fix a thing. They issued statements, organized emergency sessions, mobilized what they could, and broadcast their mobilization loudly on every open frequency so that the galaxy could see humans responding, scrambling, leaning forward. The response was real, the ships were real, the intention was real. But the distance was the distance. Vexcaroth received the intelligence about the inbound human reinforcements and noted it without concern. 11 days. His strike would be complete in 3. The reinforcements would arrive to find the outcome already written. He had done this calculation before. He always did this calculation before. The humans are sending ships, Gorath reported from the tactical station. Yes, said Vexcaroth. 11 days out. Yes. Goreth waited. Then, should we adjust timeline? No, said Vexcaroth. The timeline adjusts nothing. We will be done in 3 days. Let them send their ships. They can retrieve their survivors. He said survivors the way you say a word that isn't quite accurate, but is close enough. On the Ardent, Priya was back at the cargo manifest. She had slept badly. She had eaten breakfast and barely tasted it. She had come to her station early and pulled up the manifest before her shift started and sat with it in the pre-shift quiet of the bridge, running the same numbers she had run 3 days ago. The weight discrepancy was still there. She pulled up every maintenance code filed in the 6 months before the Ardent left Earth. There were a lot of them. The ship was old. Maintenance codes were basically a second language on this vessel. She went through them one by one, cross-referencing weight against listed components. Most of them matched, small variances within margin. Except for one other entry, filed 11 months ago, 2 weeks into the voyage, a code for navigational recalibration equipment. Weight, 800 kilograms. She looked up the navigational recalibration equipment for a Meridian 7 class engine. Maximum weight, 60 kilograms. 800. She sat back in her chair. Behind her, the bridge door opened. Dross walked in with his cold coffee and took his seat. He did not look at her. He looked at the main display. "Commander," she said. "Ensign, can I ask you something about the cargo manifest?" A pause, not long. "No," he said. Priya turned back to her station. She looked at the numbers. 800 kilograms. 14 times heavy cooling parts. A ship traveling for 14 months at a speed that made every other vessel in the sector feel contempt. "Sir," she said, "we're not going to the Hellion colonies, are we?" It wasn't quite a question. Dross didn't answer it like one either. "No," he said. "We're going somewhere else." "Yes. At this speed we'll reach." She did the math in her head, which was fast because she was good at math even when she was scared. The intersection point of the Cashin corridor entrance, the point where the Conclave fleet would have come from. Dross drank his coffee. "That's where we're going," she said. He said nothing. She stared at the display. The Conclave fleet's last reported position was deep into the corridor now, pushing toward the colonies, moving fast, moving away from where the Ardent was headed. "Sir," she said, and her voice was careful and low, "what did we leave behind us?" Dross looked at the main display. The stars, the slow drift of their position marker. "Do your job, Ensign," he said. "We'll talk when it's time." She turned back to her station. Her hands were very still on the console. That was how she handled the feeling, pressed it flat with deliberate stillness, the way you hold a cut tight to stop bleeding. She did her job. The Conclave's first strike on the Hellion colonies happened on a Tuesday. The Ardent received the report on a 14-minute signal delay, because that was how far away they were from the event. So everything they heard had already happened by the time they heard it. The battle was already over or still continuing, and there was no way to know which. What came through was fragments, Captain Marsh's tactical net, open military frequency, heavy encryption, but the Ardent had the keys. Taking fire on port side, damage to reactor 2. Conclave dreadnought on heading 27, she's not stopping, she is not stopping. Civilian transports, we need the transports moving now. We've lost the Bridget Ewan, she's gone, there's nothing. The fragments came and went for 40 minutes. Then the frequency dropped to static. Then a new signal came in, different voice, lower, calmer than the situation deserved. "Captain Marsh, Hellion Station has been taken. The Rock's communications are down. We are holding position around Hellion Prime. We have lost 4 ships. We are holding." Static. Then quieter, "We are holding. Earth Command, we are holding. Please advise on reinforcement ETA. Over." The bridge of the Ardent was silent. Priya was looking at her console and not seeing it. Thon was at navigation, his long fingers very still on his controls. His face was unreadable in the specific way that Grevians are unreadable. All the expression was in micro-movement, small shifts around the mouth, and eyes that a human face would have broadcast loudly. You needed to know a Grevian for a long time to read them. Most people on this ship did not know Thon well enough. But Priya had been here 11 months, and she looked at the back of Thon's head and saw the micro-movement around his jaw. He was angry. She thought she might be angry too. She was not certain. There was a feeling in her chest that could have been anger or could have been grief, and she was not sure which was worse to have while being completely unable to do anything about either one. The conclave will finish the colonial assault in approximately 2.5 days, Thon said. It was not a question. It was just a timeline. Yes, said Dross. And then they will withdraw back through the Cashin corridor. Yes. The same corridor entrance where we are currently headed. Silence. Thon turned in his seat to look at the commander. Priya turned too, slowly, because she was starting to understand something, and understanding it was changing the shape of the thing she felt in her chest. Dross was looking at the display, dark space, the slow crawl of their position marker. Behind them, a long, thin line tracing 14 months of travel. You seeded the corridor, Thon said. Still looking at the display. You seeded the corridor before we left, Thon said. 14 months ago, when we first passed through it. The maintenance codes, the impossible weight, 14 times heavy. The Ardent hadn't been traveling toward the Hellion colonies. It had never been going to the Hellion colonies. It had come from Earth, passed through the Cashin corridor, seeded it with something heavy and dormant, and then continued into Sector 7 to drift and be slow and be ignored. 14 months of patience. 14 months of letting every alien in the sector look at them and laugh and look away. Priya's hands were not still anymore. They were flat on the console, pressing down, and she could feel her own pulse in her fingertips. Sir, she said, her voice came out steadier than she expected. What did you put in the corridor? Dross turned from the display. He looked at her, then at Thon. Then he said, We'll talk when it's time, Ensign. And he turned back to the display, and the Ardent moved, and it was slow. It was always slow, and 14 months of travel stretched out behind them like a thread, connecting the present to the moment this plan had begun, back when the Conclave was in exactly the wrong position to notice, and the Ardent was exactly invisible enough to do what it needed to do. The Conclave fleet was ahead of them, moving fast, laughing at the pace of things they couldn't be bothered to destroy. The thread held. It always holds. You just have to be patient enough to pull it. The waiting was the hardest part. Not the fear, not the uncertainty. The waiting, which contained both of those things and added to them its own particular torture. The knowledge that events were happening far away, and all you could do about them was exist in your slow ship and breathe your recycled air and drink your bad coffee, and let the time pass at whatever pace time decided to pass. The Ardent was 6 days out from the Cashin corridor entrance. 6 days at .16 light. In those 6 days, the Conclave would finish what it was doing to the Hellion colonies. In those 6 days, Captain Marsh would hold Hellion Prime or she would not hold Hellion Prime. In those 6 days, the settlers on the rock would either have communication restored or they would not. People would make decisions under pressure. Ships would burn. Things would either break or hold. And the Ardent would travel at .16 light, because that was what the Ardent did. The crew broke in different ways. An engineer named Vasquez stopped eating, not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself. She just began taking slightly less food at each meal, and nobody noticed immediately because the mess hall was not a place where people paid close attention to each other's portions. By day 3, Priya noticed. And on day 4, she put an extra roll on Vasquez's tray without comment, and Vasquez looked at it, and after a moment ate it, and nothing was said. 2 crew members got into an argument in the corridor outside crew quarters. Not about the war, about a shift schedule. But the argument was loud and lasted too long and said things that shift schedules don't actually justify, and anyone listening understood that the argument was not about the shift schedule. Ortega spent most of his off hours in the engine room, not because anything was wrong with the engines, but because he was the kind of person who needed his hands busy, and the engine room gave him things to do with his hands. Thon did not visibly break. Thon sat at his navigation station and did his job. He ate at regular intervals. He slept at regular intervals. From the outside, he appeared functional and steady in a way that the humans around him largely were not, which was its own kind of comment on the situation. But Priya watched him. On day 2 after the first colonial strike, she watched him read a signal that came in on the Grevian frequencies. He read it for 4 minutes. Then he closed it. Then he sat with his hands very still for 11 minutes doing nothing, which for Thon was unusual because Thon was not a person who did nothing. "Personal news?" she asked. "No," he said. "Tactical." He turned to look at her. The Grevian settlement in the Hellion system. There are approximately 6,000 Grevians living on Hellion Station, which the Conclave now controls. Priya looked at him. "I didn't know there were Grevians on station." "Most people do not know there are Grevians outside Grevian space," he said. He turned back to his console. "They assume we stay where we come from." She didn't know what to say to that. She said nothing. After a moment she turned back to her own console and the bridge returned to its quiet hum and the Ardent moved at .16 light. On day 3, Thon went adross. He found him in the same place he always found him at his desk, display on, mug of coffee going cold beside him. The photograph above the desk, dark water, gray sky. Thon stood in the doorway. He had been on this ship long enough to fill this doorway without hitting his head. "Commander." "Thon, I want to know what we are doing." "I've told you." "You've told me patient words," Thon said. His voice was quiet, still, in the way of a thing that has decided to be honest and is not sure how it will go. "You've told me to wait, to trust. You've told me we are moving in the right direction. You have not told me what we are doing." Dross looked at him. "There are 6,000 Grevians on Hellion Station," Thon said. "I know." "There are 400,000 humans on Hellion Prime." "I know." "There are people on the rock who we cannot reach because their communications are down, and we do not know what is happening to them." "I know." Thon's long face was very still. "Commander, I have been on this ship for 3 years. I chose to be here. I did not have to be here. I was assigned a posting on a Grevian vessel, and I requested transfer to this ship, which is something that took a significant amount of time to arrange and which my family thought was perhaps a sign of mental instability." He paused. "I came here because I believed humans were doing something that other species were missing, something with the long view. Something with the patience." Another pause. "I have been waiting for proof of that belief." Dross looked at the photograph. Dark water, gray sky. "Do you understand," Dross said slowly, "that if I tell you what we are doing, and if at any point between now and when we do it the Conclave intercepts a signal, any signal, one word, one encrypted packet, one data fragment, they will know to look in the corridor?" Thon said nothing. "And if they look in the corridor," Dross said, "they will find it, and they will understand immediately what they're looking at, and they will sweep it. And everything we've done, every month of slow travel, every hour of being mocked and dismissed and left alone, will be nothing. We will have traded 6 months of colonial casualties for nothing." Thon was very quiet. "So I don't tell people," Dross said. "Not because I don't trust people, because signals travel faster than ships and one moment of someone saying the wrong thing on the wrong frequency ends this." A long silence. "How many people know?" Thon asked. "Me," said Dross. "Earth Command. The mission architects who designed it. The specific crew who handled the seeding, who are currently on a different ship in a different sector living normal lives. That's it. Not even your first officer. Especially not my first officer. First officers die. First officers get captured. First officers get signals intercepted. Thon stood in the doorway for a moment longer. "You are asking me to trust you," he said. "I am asking you to trust the plan," Dross said. "Which is different. You don't have to trust me. I'm not asking for that." Thon looked at him for a long time with his careful alien eyes. Then he ducked back through the doorway and went back to his station. Day 4. Priya found the drones. Not the actual drones, she couldn't find those, because they were in the corridor and the Ardent was 6 days away. But she found them in the paperwork, which was both more and less satisfying than finding the actual things. She had been going through the maintenance codes again, specifically the ones that corresponded to the inexplicably heavy cargo filed 14 months ago. She had pulled the original Earth Command manifest that the cargo had been cross-referenced against, a real document, signed and stamped, 14 months old. The document listed the cargo as Extended Range Passive Sensor Array Components Maintenance Class D. Quantity, 40,000 units. 40,000. She sat with that number. She pulled up the technical specifications for Extended Range Passive Sensor Arrays. They were standard equipment on exploration and reconnaissance vessels. Small, compact, designed to be deployed in clusters to extend sensor coverage across large volumes of space. Passive meaning they transmitted nothing when dormant, invisible on any scan that wasn't looking for them specifically. The technology had been around for 30 years. A standard passive sensor array weighed approximately 0.4 kilograms. 40,000 of them, 16,000 kilograms of sensor equipment. The manifest said the cargo weighed 16,000 kilograms. The numbers matched perfectly, which was the first number on this ship that had matched anything in 2 weeks, and that perfect matching was itself suspicious, because her brain was now suspicious of everything. She pulled up the modification history for extended-range passive sensor arrays. It took her 20 minutes to find what she was looking for, because it was not filed under weapons. It was not filed under tactical equipment. It was filed under propulsion research, which was the kind of filing that told you everything you needed to know about who had decided to file it and why they had decided to file it there. Modification Class R7, Extended Range Passive Sensor Array with Integrated Micropropulsion and Embedded Payload Capacity. Payload Type, Variable. Array retains full passive signature characteristics during dormancy. Active mode triggered by external signal on designated frequency. Active mode duration, variable based on payload configuration. She read it 3 times. 40,000 passive sensor drones. Each one invisible to standard scans. Each one capable of receiving a trigger signal and activating its payload. 40,000 of them, drifting dormant in the Cashin corridor for 14 months, sitting cold and silent in the dark, while the Conclave fleet traveled through and laughed about the slow human ship and never once looked for things that were small and quiet and patient. She thought about the word payload. She thought about it for a long time. Then she put her head down on her console and pressed her forehead against the cool surface of it and stayed like that for about 2 minutes. Then she sat up. She did not go to Dross. She already knew he wouldn't tell her. She had the shape of it now. She didn't need the exact specifications. She could feel the architecture of the plan the way you feel the shape of a room in the dark. Large, old, carefully laid. She went back to her station. She did her job. On day 5, the Conclave's main attack concluded. Captain Marsh transmitted a final status report from Hellion Prime. Her voice was flat and controlled, and said the things that needed to be said without extra words. 4 ships lost from the Colonial Defense Force. The remaining 10 were damaged at various levels, none catastrophically. Hellion Prime had sustained damage to 2 of its 3 orbital platforms. The surface infrastructure was largely intact because the Conclave had not attacked the surface. The Vexali didn't want rubble. They wanted functioning colonies to administer and tax and use. Hellion Station was occupied, Conclave ground forces. The rock was silent. Marsh was holding the defensive perimeter. Earth Command reinforcements were now 6 days out. "We are intact," Marsh said. "We have given everything we have, requesting confirmation that Earth Command reinforcements remain on schedule." The signal ended. Priya looked at the timeline on her display. Earth Command reinforcements 6 days out. The Ardent now 5 days from the corridor entrance. The Conclave fleet was beginning to pull back, victorious, moving toward the corridor, moving in their unhurried arrogance back toward the space they had come from. Back toward the corridor. Back toward 40,000 things that had been waiting for them for 14 months. In his chair, Dross drank his cold coffee and looked at the display and said nothing. That night, Priya went to the small observation port in the corridor between the bridge and crew quarters and looked out at the stars. At this speed, they barely moved. You had to watch for a long time before you could see the shift. She pressed her palm flat against the cold glass. Out there in the dark and the cold of the Cashin corridor, 40,000 small things were waiting. They had no opinions about it. They were not patient because patience requires wanting something. They were just dormant, just there, just ready for the signal that would tell them what to be. She thought about what payload meant. She thought about the Conclave fleet sailing back through that corridor, victorious and loud and completely unaware. She thought about being 14 months early. She thought about what it meant to be that kind of slow. "Patience is a weapon," she said to the window, quietly to herself. The stars drifted by, barely moving. She stayed at the window for a long time. On the morning of day 6, Dross called the senior crew to the briefing room. It was the smallest room on the ship and still felt too large for what it contained, which was 12 people sitting around a table that had a burn mark on one corner from an incident nobody talked about, and a coffee stain in the center that had become a kind of ship landmark. The walls were bare. The lighting was the same mediocre white as everywhere else on the Ardent. Nothing about the room suggested that what was about to be said in it would matter. 12 people, 10 humans, Thon, and a Grevian engineer named Setha who had been on the ship for 18 months and spoke very little and fixed things extremely well. Priya was there. Ortega, the first officer, a human named Commander Liss who was efficient and capable and had been running this ship alongside Dross for 3 years without ever being told the whole truth about what they were doing, which she was aware of and had chosen to accept because she trusted Dross the way you trust a structure you can't see the foundations of cautiously, and because it has not fallen yet. Dross stood at the head of the table and did not have his coffee. That was the first sign that something was different. Priya could not remember seeing him without it. He put a display on the table, a map of the Cashin corridor, the Ardent's position, the corridor entrance. "We arrive at the corridor entrance in approximately 8 hours, he said. "At that point, I will transmit a signal. The signal will activate 40,000 dormant microdrone units that we seeded into the corridor 14 months ago during our initial passage through this system." Silence in the room. Not the silence of people who are surprised. The silence of people who have been carrying a suspicion and are now watching it confirmed. "Each unit is a modified passive sensor array," Dross continued. "The modifications include a propulsion module, a targeting system, and an explosive payload rated at approximately 60 kilograms of equivalent yield per unit. In their dormant state, they generate no active signal. They are invisible to standard scans. They have been drifting in the corridor for 14 months without detection." He looked around the table. He looked at each person long enough to be real about it. "The Conclave fleet is currently in the process of withdrawing through the Cashin corridor. Their withdrawal route takes them directly through the seeded zone. Our drone field covers approximately 11,000 cubic kilometers of the corridor's middle section. Given the Conclave's formation density, they run tight. They always run tight. We estimate 80 to 92% of their vessels will be within the field simultaneously at the point of activation." Liss, the first officer, was looking at the map. Her face was doing the specific thing faces do when the mind behind them is processing something very large and very complicated, and choosing which part to address first. "How long have you known about this?" she asked. "Since before we left Earth," Dross said. "And you couldn't tell us?" "I couldn't tell anyone. Any signal, any leak, any fragment." "I understand the security logic," Liz said. "I'm not questioning the logic." A pause. "I'm nodding the weight of it." Dross nodded. He accepted that. "The Conclave doesn't know the drones are there," Ortega said. It was not a question. He was just placing the fact in the room, making it real by saying it. "No, they scanned the corridor twice during their initial passage. Standard sweep. The drones are specifically designed to evade standard sweeps. Cold signature, passive state, distributed positioning. There is nothing to find unless you know what you're looking for and are actively looking for it." "They don't know what they're looking for," Priya said. "They've never seen this technology deployed this way before," Dross said. "It's been in development for 9 years. The field deployment phase of this operation began 14 months ago when we left Earth. We were given the window because the Conclave's expansion toward the Hellion system was predictable. Their strategic patterns are extremely consistent, and we had 3 years of data suggesting they would move on the colonies within an 18-month window." "And the colonies," Thon said. The room got very quiet in a different way. Dross looked at Thon. "What about them?" "You knew the Conclave would attack the Hellion colonies." Thon's voice was the same tone it always was, quiet, aimed. "You knew this 14 months ago." "We projected it as likely, yes. But the operation required the Conclave fleet to move through the corridor and then return, which means the operation required the colonial attack to occur, which means," he stopped, started again. "The colonies were part of the plan." The room was very quiet. "No," Dross said. "The colonies were not part of the plan. The colonial attack was a predictable consequence of the Conclave's strategic behavior. If we had moved to reinforce the colonies early and visibly, the Conclave would have read that as a defensive response and adjusted their withdrawal route. They might not have used the corridor at all. Every action we took, the slow approach, the passive posture, the visible scramble of Earth Command's reinforcements, was designed to make the situation look exactly as it appeared. A humanity that was caught off guard and responding. And the colonies paid for that appearance." Dross was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. The word sat in the room. Nobody argued with it. Nobody tried to make it smaller. Priya was looking at the table, specifically at the coffee stain in the center, which she had looked at many times before without thinking about it. Now she was looking at it with the focused attention of a person who needs to look at something neutral while processing something that is not neutral at all. Captain Marsh's voice on the comms. "We are holding. We have given everything we have." 4 ships, Hellion Station occupied, the rock silent. The people on those worlds had not been told they were part of a strategy. They had fought because they were attacked, and that was what you did when you were attacked. They had lost people and ships and stations, and they had held what they could hold and sent their distress signals and waited for help that was always too far away. They had not been sacrificed. Dross was technically right about that. The Conclave would have attacked the colonies regardless. The plan had not caused the attack. But the plan had required watching it happen without intervening. Priya pressed the flat of her hand against the coffee stain. She felt the table's surface, solid and real under her palm. "And this works," she said. She looked up at Dross. "The drones, the field, the signal, this actually works. The probability models put field effectiveness at." "Does it work?" He looked at her. "We think so. We've never tested it at this scale." The room absorbed that. 40,000 drones, Liz said. "Some of them will have drifted out of position over 14 months. "Yes, some. We built the field with redundancy. The corridor is a natural choke point. The gravitational profile means significant drift is unlikely. We estimate 15 to 20% positional degradation, which still leaves sufficient coverage. And the Conclave fleet, inside the field, has nowhere to go. The corridor walls are gravitational. You can't just exit perpendicular. The vectors won't allow it. To exit the field, they would need to decelerate, turn, and run the field backward, which takes time. At activation, the drones move. They're small, they're fast, and there are 40,000 of them. The fleet can shoot. They will shoot. They will destroy some of the drones, but not 40,000 drones in the time available. Ortega looked at the map. What does 60 kilograms of yield do to a Vexali dreadnought? One unit, very little, armor breach, localized damage. Dross looked at the map. The targeting parameters prioritize propulsion and weapons systems. Each vessel in the field will be targeted by multiple units simultaneously. The cumulative effect on a dreadnought, we estimate 8 to 12 units per ship for mission kills. And there are 2 dreadnoughts in the fleet, Liz said. Yes. And the destroyers, and the battle carrier. Yes. The room was quiet for a long time. Setha, the Grevian engineer who had not spoken yet and rarely spoke in meetings, said in her precise, clipped standard, "This is the most patient thing I have ever heard of." Nobody laughed, but something shifted in the room. Something loosened slightly. Dross looked at his hands. "We have 8 hours," he said. "I want every system on this ship confirmed operational. I want the signal array checked twice. The transmission protocol has to be exact. The drones need the activation frequency, and they need the targeting coordinates in the correct sequence or they go autonomous and hit whatever is closest. We've modeled for that, but it makes the outcome less predictable." "What happens to us when we transmit?" Priya asked. "The Conclave will track the signal." "Yes, we will be visible the moment we transmit. We will be the only human ship in range. We will be immediately identified as the signal source." He paused. "Our defensive capacity is what it is." "Insufficient," Liz said flatly. "Yes. So we're betting that the drones work well enough and fast enough that there's no Conclave fleet left to retaliate." "We're betting on the field effectiveness," Dross said. "Yes." Priya looked at Thon. Thon was looking at the map, the corridor, the Conclave fleet's last known position, moving through, coming back, not knowing. "I want to say something," Priya said. Dross looked at her. I'm not objecting to this. I want to be clear about that." She was speaking slowly, making sure the words were right. "I just want to say that those people on Hellion Prime, Marsh and her crew, the people on station, the Rock, they held. When they had no reason to believe anyone was coming for them, they held. And I think that deserves to be said out loud before we go do the thing that required them to hold." Nobody said anything. Then Thon said, "Agreed." Then Ortega said, "Agreed." Then everyone in the room said something similar, and some of them said nothing at all but nodded, which was the same thing. Dross looked at his hands again. "We have 8 hours," he said. "Let's use them." The 8 hours pass the way hours pass when you are waiting for something big. Not slowly, not fast. In their own strange way, some minutes dragging, some minutes disappearing entirely, the texture of time going strange under the pressure of what was coming. Priya ran diagnostics. She checked the signal array 4 times. She checked the transmission protocol sequence until she could recite it from memory. She verified the targeting coordinate package, which had been loaded into the system 14 months ago and stored in a sealed partition she had not had access to until Dross gave her the code that morning. When she saw the targeting coordinates laid out in full, she understood the full shape of the field. 11,000 cubic kilometers. The distribution pattern not random, not uniform. Specifically clustered around the gravitational channels where a fleet running in tight formation would naturally concentrate. Anticipating the exact behavior of a fleet that always ran tight, that had always run tight, that would have no reason to change that habit for a corridor transit. Whoever had designed this had known the Conclave's formation habits 3 years ago, had studied them, had built the field specifically for the way the Vexali fight. She sat with that, the patience of the design, not just the 14 months of travel, the 3 years of study before that, the 9 years of technology development before that. 12 years of being slow and quiet and deliberate, so that one day you could be fast and decisive and total. Outside, the Cashin corridor entrance was visible on long-range sensors now. A gravitational narrowing, a choke point in space where the physics funneled travel into a relatively small volume. Easy transit if you knew the vectors. Hard to avoid if you were using this region of space at all. In there, cold and dark and patient, 40,000 small things were waiting for a signal they had been designed for. Priya looked at the corridor entrance on her display. She thought about what was in there. She thought about what was coming through from the other side. She pressed her hands flat on the console. She waited. The Conclave fleet entered the seated zone at 14:07 ship time. Dross was watching the sensor display. He could see them on long range at 22 contacts, tight formation, exactly as expected, moving through the corridor at .8 light on their return trajectory. The withdrawal of a victorious fleet. The leisurely pace of something that has done what it came to do and is heading home and does not expect the journey to contain any surprises. They were 3.4 minutes into the seated zone when Dross said, "Now." Priya's hands were already on the transmission controls. She sent the signal. It took 0.3 seconds to reach the corridor entrance. It took another 1.2 seconds to propagate through the drone field at the speed of electromagnetic radiation. For 1.5 seconds, nothing happened. Then 40,000 things woke up. Aboard the Conclave flagship Unbroken Dominion, the first indication that something was wrong was a contact report from the sensor station. "Admiral," said the sensor officer, I'm reading contact signatures. Multiple, very multiple." Vexcaroth turned from the forward display. "Classification. Unknown. They are very small. They are active. They are moving. Moving toward us." "Yes, Admiral, all of them. Moving toward us." Goreth looked at the readings from his tactical station. He had never seen a reading like this in 17 years of combat command. The contacts were everywhere. They filled the sensor display the way snow fills a window, dense, distributed, coming from all directions simultaneously. "How many?" Vexcaroth said. The sensor officer checked again. "Admiral, I am reading 37,400 and..." "How many?" A pause. "Many, sir, very many." Vexcaroth looked at the display. He understood in that moment not the full picture, not the 14 months and the patience and the slow ship and the signal, but the essential shape of what was happening. The corridor, the formation, the fact that every ship in his fleet was here together, tight, exactly as they always were. They were in a box. The box had just closed. "Evasive," he said. "All ships, all speed, evasive." "What heading, Admiral?" He looked at the corridor walls on the display. Gravitational boundary to port. Gravitational boundary to starboard. Fleet ahead and behind him, no room to scatter. The contacts coming from all angles. "Any heading," he said. "All headings, go." The next 4 minutes were not a battle. A battle requires two sides capable of meaningful engagement. The Conclave fleet fired. Their point defense systems were good, very good, and they destroyed drones in significant numbers. In the first 90 seconds, Conclave fire eliminated approximately 4,000 units. But 4,000 out of 40,000 is not enough. The drones did not fire back. They did not need to. They were not weapons in the traditional sense. They were packages. Small, fast packages, each one with a target designation and a simple set of instructions. Close to range, detonate. The targeting protocol had been built around the Conclave's formation habits and the specific armor profiles of Vexali military vessels. Each drone's targeting system evaluated the ship in front of it and aimed for the systems the design parameters identified as highest value. Propulsion, weapons buses, shield generators, not hull, not crew quarters, not life support. Take their ability to move and fight. The destroyers went first. Smaller hulls, less armor, reached by the drones soonest. 3 destroyers lost propulsion in the first 90 seconds. 1 lost its weapons bus entirely. The others began taking hits in sequence, one after another, rapid and systematic and completely without drama. Not a great explosion. A series of precise, targeted detonations, each one doing a specific thing, the combined effect building incrementally toward the same outcome. The battle carrier tried to turn. It was large, and the corridor was not wide enough for the maneuver it was attempting. It caught a gravitational boundary on its port side, and the structural stress added to the accumulated drone strikes, and something in its midsection gave way. The dreadnoughts fought longer. They were built for exactly this kind of punishment, and their armor held through the early waves. But there were 40,000 drones, and the dreadnoughts were the priority targets on the distribution table, which meant they received proportionally more of the field than their size would suggest. The unbroken Dominion took its first significant hit at 93 seconds, then another, then a cluster of 7 simultaneous detonations along its starboard propulsion array. It did not explode. The great conclave dreadnoughts did not go out like movie explosions. They went out like machinery goes out, gradually, sequentially, each system failing in turn, the lights in the wrong places going dark one section at a time. 4 minutes and 11 seconds after Priya sent the signal, the unbroken Dominion's main propulsion went offline. The corridor was quiet. Not empty. The ships were still there, most of them, some damaged beyond function, some capable of life support but nothing more, floating in the gravitational choke point of the Kashin corridor with no propulsion and no weapons and 40,000 partially spent drones drifting around them like the world's most lethal debris field. The Ardent had watched all of it on long-range sensors. The bridge was silent. Priya was looking at her display, 37 contacts still registering. The 22 conclave ships, most of them, plus the drone field residue. She was looking at the contact signatures, still, disabled, real, and her brain was trying to process what the numbers in front of her meant and having some difficulty. Status, Dross said. 17 confirmed mission kills, Priya said. Her voice came out flat and informational, which was the only way she could make it come out at all. 12 vessels mission killed, propulsion and weapons destroyed, structurally intact. 5 vessels destroyed. Remaining 5 showing significant damage. They are, she checked, not moving. None of them are moving. Dross looked at the display. He looked at it for a long time. Life signs, Liz said. Extensive, Priya said. Most of the fleet is structurally intact. The targeting protocol, she paused. The targeting protocol worked as described, propulsion and weapons, not life support. Thon said nothing. He was looking at the display from his navigation station with his long Grevian face in profile, and Priya could see the micro-movement around his jaw, and this time she couldn't read it. It was something she hadn't seen on him before. Vexcaroth was alive. He was in the command chair of a ship that was floating without propulsion in the middle of a corridor, with 21 other ships in similar condition, surrounded by the debris of the most comprehensive tactical defeat in Vexali military history. He was alive because the humans, the small, slow, insufficient humans in their old, mocked, .16 light vessel, had specifically designed this thing to leave survivors, which was its own particular cruelty. His comms officer reported that the communication systems were still functioning. Of course they were. Life support, communications, passive systems, all working. Everything that kept people alive and aware of their situation. Everything that let them understand what had happened to them. Vexcaroth opened a channel. He was not sure who he was talking to. Everyone, maybe. The open frequency that covered this sector, the one he had used to mock a slow human ship and laugh at a species he had not bothered to fear. He said one thing. His voice was not defeated in the way of a person who has given up. It was something harder. The voice of a very intelligent being in the process of updating a very fundamental assumption. He said, "We did not look." Static. Then silence. The Ardent received the transmission on the same open frequency. The bridge heard it. Priya heard it. She looked at the display, 37 contacts still quiet. She thought about Captain Marsh saying we are holding. She thought about Hellion Station, occupied. The Rock, silent. The people on those worlds who had held when there was nothing to hold with except the decision to keep holding, who had not been told they were part of a plan and who had given what they gave regardless. She thought about 14 months of slow travel, 12 years of development before that, 3 years of watching conclave formation patterns, the patience of that, the enormous, difficult, expensive patience of designing something that required you to appear weak for years before you could be strong for 4 minutes. She pressed her hands flat on her console. She did not feel triumphant. She felt something quieter and more complicated, something that sat in the chest differently than triumph. She thought she might feel it for a long time. Dross was at his desk when Thon found him. The photograph above the desk, dark water, gray sky, no people. Thon stood in the doorway. "Commander." "Thon." A silence between them, not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that has been earned. "Vexgaroth is requesting communication," Thon said. "He wants to discuss terms." "I know, Liss is handling it." Another silence. "The Earth Command reinforcement fleet will reach the Hellion system in 4 days, Thon said. "They will have what they need now. Evidence. Leverage. 22 disabled Conclave warships in the corridor." "Yes." Thon looked at the photograph. He had never asked about it in 3 years. He looked at it now. "Where is that?" Dross looked at it too. "Earth, South Coast, place I grew up." "You want to go back?" It wasn't a question. Dross looked at the photograph for a moment. "Someday." Thon was quiet. Then he said, "My family thought coming here was instability, choosing a human ship, choosing this slow thing when I could have been on a Grevian fast cruiser doing reasonable military work." He was looking at the photograph. "I did not have a good explanation for them at the time." "And now?" Thon looked at the commander. "Now I have one." A pause. "It is a long explanation, but I have one." Dross looked at him. "I believe you now," Thon said. "What I thought humans had, the long view, I believe it now." Dross nodded once. He picked up his coffee mug. It was cold. He drank it anyway. "Get some rest," he said. "We've got a long trip back." "At .16 light," Thon said. "At .16 light." Thon almost smiled. On a Grevian face that was a micro-movement, slight and precise, but it was real. He ducked back through the doorway. Priya was at the observation window in the corridor when Ortega found her. The same window she had stood at before. Same stars, barely moving. He stood next to her without saying anything. After a while she said, "Do you think the people on the colonies will understand what it took, why nobody came?" Ortega thought about it. "Some will, some won't, that's probably fair." "It doesn't feel clean." "No," he said, "it doesn't." He looked out at the stars. "I don't think clean was on the table. I think the options were this or something worse." "That's what people always say." "Yeah," he said, "doesn't make it wrong." She looked at the stars, barely moving. The Ardent doing what it always did, going at the speed it always went. The hum of the engines, the same hum it had been for 11 months of her posting and 3 years of Thon's and everything else. She thought about 40,000 small things being patient in the dark for 14 months. She thought about what it means to design something that requires you to look weak, to absorb the laughter, to let the contempt land and not answer it, to be the slow thing, the old thing, the thing everyone glances at and dismisses and looks away from because there is nothing interesting about a ship going .16 light in the wrong direction. To be that on purpose, for as long as it takes. She pressed her palm against the cold glass. Outside, the stars moved in their slow way. The Ardent traveled at .16 light. It was going home. It was, at that speed, the most dangerous thing in known space. Nobody looking at it would have known. That was the whole point.